This is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast. This is VP. We are a solutions-based podcast, diving into the world of contrarian investing and alternative finance. You can find us hosted on the No Nonsense Forex YouTube channel, nononsenseforex.com, and podcast players everywhere. Episode 185 is brought to us by Bybit. Look, you sat there and watched good traders, mediocre traders, and even bad traders absolutely murder the crypto trading market in 2024. While you sat there and did nothing. Don't allow this to happen again in 2025. It's all out there for the taking, and it's always going to be. And sign up for one of the largest brokers in the world that just gives you so many great things. Promotions, giveaways, airdrops, contests, all of it. But you have to lock in to our ecosystem so you can access all these things. Go down to the show notes, click the link to the Bybit blog, read it, and at the very bottom of that blog is my affiliate link. Click it, get signed up, and you're in. You have to be actively trading, of course, or else none of this applies, but you're in. And you're going to find out that with Bybit, membership has its rewards. It is the 10-Minute Contrarian Podcast, and first of all, I would like to wish all of you out there in Contrarian land a very happy 2025. 2024 was really great for us. Most years are really great for us here. There is very little reason why you guys should not be making a lot of money and working on preserving the money you make in the meantime, because I just don't know if 2025 is going to be as easy as 2024 was. And the same goes for my predictions. I went 6-3 in 2024. I don't know if I'm going to do as well this year because my predictions are going to be a little bit all over the place. I'm going to use one to hedge the other, and this is really my way of saying, look, don't take these too seriously. Be ready for just about anything and be able to adjust accordingly. Now, I will say, last time we did the big macro episode 1 year ago today, I had about 2 pages worth of notes, which is actually a lot for a podcast. Sometimes these things go long already, but man, I think that one went super long. This time, oddly enough, I only have about 3/4 of a page worth of notes. That's because there are just less factors out there in macro world globally that matter anymore, in my opinion. I think, and again, I always say I don't want it to be this way. I don't like talking about this too much, but we really just don't have a choice anymore, contrarians. It's so much of it is going to come down to the United States and what this administration does. Like, other countries just don't even really move the needle anymore. Like, oh, there's a new war broke out in the Middle East. Oh, well, doesn't it always? You know, like you'll see a couple days of market manipulation once things like this get announced, but then it just goes right back to where the market was typically in about a week or so. You know, do you have a big election scandal in a place like France, which is a very powerful, influential country? Market just doesn't really seem to care. But when anything happens in the United States, it just seems to care a lot more, short-term and long-term. So if you're from a different country and this upsets you, well, you may as well get over it because it's just going to upset you more and more. And that's not helping anybody. But I think everybody out there should be grateful that at least on the macro side of things, this just makes everything a lot easier when you can consolidate it all into one place. You know, less moving parts is a good thing when you're trying to invest. You know, the less complicated things are, the better. Now, the problem is within that one little sector that we need to pay attention to, which is the United States and American politics, things are anything but predictable and anything but stable. And you guys have all seen it. Ever since the election, things have already gotten wild. Yeah, and we're still 16 days away from the inauguration. You know, imagine what's going to happen when it's officially on. So let me just take this time to remind everybody, because I've said it many times before on this podcast, it pays to be a short-term trader, and it pays to be a patient, long-term investor. This really, even more so than before, is not the time to get stuck in that mushy middle. If you're going to trade, trade. If you're going to do what we do here on this podcast and invest, you really have to be in it for the long haul. Because I really do think we could see some pretty violent moves to both sides. And the further back you're zoomed out, the less these moves are going to matter to you. And that's a good thing. Because when you do that, you focus on what's real and you focus less on the manipulation. You let those people stuck in the middle worry about getting taken out due to manipulation, and you just sit back and ride the overall prevailing trend. It doesn't have to be hard. But back to the matter at hand here. This administration has already proclaimed some pretty wild things. There should be, if they're able to do it, we'll talk about that in a moment, a complete overhaul in not just the people you currently see in government, but the overall methods and just the way things are done. And it's all going to be attempted on a very grand scale. And when you have this, like I said before, these transitions are not smooth. Now, what I think Trump and the administration is trying to do is two major things. One, shake up things internally and get rid of a lot of, again, the processes and just things that have been allowed to be completely corrupted over time. Governments will never not be corrupt, but there's some things that have just completely gone over the edge. And so the next 4 years is going to be a lot of attempting to fix those things. We heard this back in 2016, and it didn't really get done. And I said before, that was one of my complaints with that administration. But it seems like the support is there, not completely. We'll talk about that in a moment, too. But the second thing they're trying to do is just really do what Trump has always done and make good deals. And he's playing big stack poker with what he has. And when you do that, deals can more easily be made. They're very anti-war because war is bad for business. Wars are expensive. And as we've seen, wars are very unpopular in the United States as well. I'd said this on a previous episode. Pretty much every administration, not named the Trump administration, was really, really gung-ho on going to war. And the United States was thought of as a huge bully. Well, turns out the American people never really wanted that. We were always propagandized into thinking that we wanted it. But as a people and as a nation, that was never really the case. And Trump is even, it looks like, willing to play ball with Russia and China should he get a much, much better end of the deal. Now, this is going to be an interesting interplay with Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who has promised to be very tough on places like Russia and China and Iran, and head of foreign trade, Robert Lighthizer, who I think is going to come back, who is a very shrewd negotiator and has always been very anti-China as well. I at least know that much about him. He was very anti-Japan back in the 80s when they were seen as a threat to American hegemony. And I don't think he's going to be taking it any easier on China. So that's going to be a really interesting interplay. But making deals, typically very lopsided deals in the United States' favor, is going to be on the menu for the next 4 years, make no mistake. So I had an episode come out last year called USA Number One. I'm like, guys, like it or not, this is where you want to typically be invested long term. Now, will that be the case for 2025? Stay tuned. But given the cards that are out on the table right now and given what the chessboard looks like, I would have a hard time backing really any other nation with my own money. I mean, look at some of the things they've said already, or at least what Trump has said, in particular, including places like Greenland and Canada and the Panama Canal. He has stated he wants all of it. Now, Trump is many things, but I don't think he's an imperialist. I mean, that would be pretty wild if we just annexed Canada and just snatched the Panama Canal from a country who doesn't want to sell it. And I don't think either of those two things are going to happen. I think it's posturing. I think it's just really this administration's way of saying, hey, Panama, hey, Canada, get your fucking shit together, because we're not having this. It's just more of a negotiating play. Oddly enough, the Greenland thing really, really has legs. I've been following this. And as this develops, I'm actually saving it for another episode, probably sometime in February. But just so you know, it does have legs. But look, with all these bold proclamations and all these lofty things this administration is trying to do, I've said this in the past too. It was like 2 or 3 weeks ago in an episode called Never Stop Prepping. He is going to be met with a lot of resistance. The Democrats are going to try and cause chaos and sabotage everything this administration tries to do. I expect a lot of chaos. Just like I should have expected power tools to come on in the background right about now. Sorry about the background noise, everybody. But there's going to be a lot of resistance, including inside of his own party. There are Republicans, standing Republicans right now in Congress, that cannot stand Donald Trump and will not support anything he does, regardless of what it is. So you have that working against them. And then you also have the American public themselves, in particular the conservatives, that will not always back what he does. We have already seen this happen with the H-1B visas. Conservatives are very divided on this, and this is one of the biggest critiques people have about conservatives in the United States. Liberals are very united. Liberals every day walk up to a counter and say, "Hi, tell me what I should care deeply about today." And then they take their marching orders and they run with it. Is this lame and ridiculous? Of course it is, but at least they're united to where, goddammit, these conservatives just keep thinking for themselves and seeking out the truth wherever they can. And as a result, they're just a lot less unified. And so this administration is going to have to deal with a lack of support from inside and outside at every turn. So given all of these factors, contrarians, it's going to be really hard to make any kind of prediction that you can really stand behind. Markets love certainty, not uncertainty. And to me, there's just a ton of uncertainty coming in for 2025. It's unlike anything we've ever seen, really. And then you got the Fed, which is also going to be probably less certain than they were in the past. We nailed it here. We said they're pretty much going to keep raising rates up until it's election time, despite what everybody else was saying, and that's exactly what they did. So if this taught us anything, it's whenever you see these people postulating about what the Fed is going to do when it comes to cutting rates in the short term, ignore them all the time. No matter how much authority these people have, they constantly get it wrong. And that includes the Fed themselves. Powell came out and said, we are going to lower rates for most of 2025. We're just going to do it a lot more slowly than before. Well, okay. What does that do to our favorite little chart we love to look at? If you don't know, go to the St. Louis Fed, type in interest rates, and it should pop right up. Historically, since the 1980s, the early 1980s, whenever you have had a rise in interest rates, followed by a flattening, followed by a drop, it has always led to recessions. And I've said before, and this prediction might be wrong, but to me, it's not the falling of the rates that cause recessions. That doesn't make any sense. It's the rise. And there is a lag effect there. And the only reason it starts to drop is because the Fed knows a recession is coming, and they're trying to get ahead of it so the recession doesn't last 5 years. And we can get more free money pumped back into the system at some point. So to me, it would make sense if rates continue to fall. It would be weird and throw a lot of things off if out of nowhere Powell decided to hike. This would completely throw off the time-space continuum and just inject even more uncertainty to what I think is already going to be a very uncertain 2025. So given these factors, and like I said before, these are the factors I think matter most. Yes, other countries exist. Yes, there are going to be significant things happening in those countries, but we're worried about our money here. That's really all we care about. And so we have to focus on the things that move the needle most, and that's just going to be the United States. And like I said, again, that's fine. That's less things for us to worry about in terms of number go up or number go down. So let's put some predictions out there. For the S&P 500, I said before in the election episode, if I was going to sabotage this administration, I would tank the market later as opposed to sooner. But if the administration has anything to say about it, I think strategically it makes way more sense to go ahead and let the market fall now as opposed to later, while sentiment is still fairly high and confidence is still relatively high in this administration, even if the euphoria is not there anymore. Like I said before, remember I said sentiment has nowhere to go but down because it's just so high. But it's still high. So what I think would be the wise thing to do is go ahead and let the market wash out a little bit and continue to say, hey, look, this is just what needs to be done. Trust the process. And this would allow you to continue to drop rates without anybody questioning you. And let's attempt to avoid a really bad recession by doing the things we need to do and just get it out of the way now. So my prediction is going to be that the S&P 500 should be lower on December 31st, 2025 than it currently is right now. I mean, and again, too, how long can NVIDIA continue to prop up this market? You know, we've said things like this before about the Magnificent Seven and about the FANG stocks, but at some point it does have to subside. You know, overall, I just feel like there's a lot more headwinds on the table than there are tailwinds. I know as soon as Trump won the election, there was all this euphoria, and investors all over the world flooded into the United States on the hope that this economy would continue to go up, but I think it needs to take a step back before it does. So my prediction is S&P 500 down. And I want to reiterate, I don't have a ton of confidence behind any of these predictions except for one. And we're not going to get to that one in this episode, but I think you guys probably know what it is. It was the same one I was the most confident in last year, but it's not going to be any of the predictions in this episode. Now, the other prediction in this episode is going to be the United States dollar. Now, most people would say, well, if you think the S&P 500 is going down, then you probably think the United States dollar is going up, because that's what happens. One goes up, one goes down, and vice versa. Well, that's not what happened in 2024, is it? S&P 500 went up, dollar went right up with it as the United States continued to eat the world. But I'm going to go a bit maybe contrarian here. I don't know. And I'm going to say the United States dollar is also going to go down. So DXY down from here, January 4th, 2025 to December 31st, 2025. Bit contradictory, yes. Am I hedging my bet a little bit? A little bit, not completely. But here's the reason I say this, because, and this chart's been going around all over Twitter, and I'm sure some of you have seen it. One, Trump wants a weaker dollar. It's good for business. Does he want the dollar to dominate world currencies? Yes, but you can still accomplish that while still having the value of it go down. And the chart I'm talking about is exactly what happened back in 2016. Trump wins the election, there's euphoria over the dollar, and it goes up. And then Trump gets into office and does what he wants to do, and the dollar did nothing but go down over time for the next 2 years. Again, we're so conditioned in the United States to only do what's good for the short term, but I think this might be the first full administration that has really realized this and is okay with taking a step back for a year and just doing the things that need to be done for the mid to long term. And that involves having a weaker dollar probably for this year and the year after, if all goes well. So I'm just going with history here. Now, oddly enough, if you go to your monthly charts and you look at the DXY, and Forex traders, we all know this because it hasn't been the worst 2 years of trading, but it can certainly be better. It certainly was not 2022. The DXY has been stuck in a fairly tight range ever since the beginning of 2023, and it is just now breaking out of that range to the upside. So for traders, we really just want to get out of that range permanently, forever. We don't care which way it goes, but we might end up seeing it fall back into that range for a little bit and maybe breaking out to the downside. Or I could be completely wrong and it just keeps going up and up and up, but it doesn't matter because tariffs have replaced the need for a weak dollar. You know, the United States used to make all their money off of tariffs, but it was a very, very long time ago and nobody remembers what that was like. So if that starts to become the norm again, then you could probably throw out a lot of things economically that used to be true for a very long time. I just don't know. But I do know there's going to be some upheaval. You know, Vivek Ramaswamy even said, he's like, look, transitions are bloody. Change hurts. So you usually wouldn't come out and say things like that unless you were prepping the American people for a transition period in 2025 that they may not all approve of, that might not be as prosperous as it was in the years prior. And so those are the main things I think you need to know in terms of the overall macro outlook for 2025. And those are my two predictions: S&P 500 down, United States dollar down. Now, what will all of this do for precious metals? That's a great question. Stay tuned for next week's episode. But buckle up, buckaroos. 2025 is going to be pretty wild if I had to put any kind of prediction out there. If what we've seen this past month is any indication, I would reiterate and remind all of you to get your defense sorted out right and make sure you're virtually immune to all of this chaos. Because there's a lot of positivity out there, a lot of euphoria, a lot of bullishness as to what this administration can accomplish. And pretty much the entire world seems to think so. So why on earth would you be doing something like prepping and making sure you have your defense in order? Now, that seems crazy at this point. But as we know, we are certainly not crazy. We are just early.